On receiving any order from Rumtop Railways, the first thing you must do is to remove the order checklist which is within the box. This shows you pictures of each of the components and will give you a quantity that you have ordered. Please check against your components that each of the quantity adds up and you have indeed got your complete order. Once the order has been checked, you need to wash each component with some hot soapy water. Make sure you wear gloves because there might well be some splatter or sharp edges on the bracket parts. They're still in their flat form at this stage. You haven't bent any of them up, and you clean everyone, giving them a good clean. It gets rid of any residue oil as well that might be on the surface of the steel. Once you've cleaned them all, give them a good dry, make sure they're nice and dry, ready to be painted. Now we do appreciate you might well have a very excited child and you're wanting to put the brackets up, but it is essential to paint all the brackets while they're still in their flat form. Once the brackets have been bent and indeed attached to the railway or room, they are almost impossible to paint because they're very difficult with all the little nuts and bolts on them. While they're still in flat form, lay them on an old piece of plywood once as they've been washed, and you lay them down flat, and then first of all you give them an oil based undercoat, just a thin base oil undercoat, and then you paint them with an emulsion, painting each side at a time, turning them over and painting the other side. It might be well worth involving your child at this stage, because with the emulsion paint you paint it the same colour as the room they're going to go into, and it allows the child to get involved with it at this stage, and I think it's great fun. If they're a little bit bludgy, it really doesn't matter, but it's essential to paint them now. It's far easier and it will take no time at all, just allowing them to dry, flicking them over and painting the other side. Don't ever consider putting them on a piece of cardboard or paper, because as the paint dries it will stick to the underside of them. It must be an old piece of plywood or an old hard surface that you don't mind getting paint on. Once the brackets have been painted, the next part of the instructions is to bend them. This can be found on page 1, 2 and 3 of your main instruction sheet with the drawings. However, I would like to just show you ceiling support arch and how to bend this. It's made of 3 components. The first one is what gets attached to the ceiling itself, and you just simply bend it over the edge of a table or a kitchen unit or something. This is for a flat ceiling and it gives a 90-degree bend, and you put the 2 double-sided tape on the back of there and that gets stuck to the ceiling. The strip between the two, between the track support and the ceiling, that isn't bent, but it's just cut to length at a later date. But to bend the track support itself, the arch, the way to do this is there is notches. Follow the drawings, but basically you're bending each side up vertically, so you're having a nice vertical. You bend one of the tags back a little bit again at the bend point, and you bend this one forward, and you do exactly the same on the other side, bending it back and bringing it forward. Now you might need to play around with the bends, but the idea is that you've got to try and get a symmetrical arch as possible, and the dimensions are quite important as well. What the dimensions you're trying to achieve is a width of 64 millimeters from one side to the other, and the total height is 126 millimeters. So play around with the bends and try and get a symmetrical arch with those measurements, with it held close together, and do them all at the same time, one after the other, because you will get better at it as you do a few. As Rumtop Railway secures the track to the wall or ceiling, there is no problem with using second-hand track. If you do use any second-hand track, at this point it's a good time to give it a good clean with either a lighter fuel or a light spirit. Make sure that you know the radius of curves you're using against the drawings on the instructions, and if you're in any doubt, please see our track specification video. With some track you'll find the posi pan is quite tight between the two sleepers. You could just push it up through, but it can damage the end sleeper. It's far better with this track if you get a screwdriver and you just turn the bolt, and you'll find the thread will just cut very nicely up through the sleeper. It doesn't damage either of the two sleepers, and it does lead to a very tight joint. With all posi pan bolts, when they're put through and tightened up with a screwdriver, they never come through past the top of the nuts. They're only flush with the top of the nuts at the very best. They never protrude further. If this does happen, you're either using a fine gauge track, which is no good for room top railways, or you used an 8mm posi pan, which is used for the ceiling support arch by mistake. So if they're ever proud, you're using the wrong bolt, and you must change it, because else it will hit the bottom of the train and could well damage and derail the train. With wall brackets, you can fit the wall support either below the track or above the track. We always like to see it above the track, because from a child looking up at the track, then the brackets are far less conspicuous, because the track tends to hide the top part of the bracket. Track kit 6 can be found on page 21 of your supplement sheet. In the example given, it uses radius 3 on the ceiling, 6 arc 45s in total, and then dropping to radius 2 and going into the corner of the room, and then going back out to radius 3 and then going back to the wall, and then the two tracks side by side in the corner is radius 3 on the outside and radius 2 on the inside. Now, the only difference being with the video is we're actually building track kit 6 from scratch. So we're starting in the corner of the room with our two tracks, and then we're then going to build a repeat of this return loop on each side. So that's the only difference, and the measurements for radius 3 dropping to radius 2 on the instructions are actually given on page 19. And you can see the measurements off the wall, which, as I say, when you see the video, it refers to these measurements with radius 3 dropping to radius 2. Our first job is to run a cotton line from the corner of the room coming out on each wall horizontally at a set distance from the ceiling. Now, we recommend 280mm, so it's 280mm, and this is the height that the track's going to run at. The maximum height it can be is 480, because that's the maximum height that a ceiling support arch will support a track from the ceiling, or the maximum distance. The instructions that you've been given show it using radius 3 dropping to radius 2, and we're actually going to do it with radius 2 dropping to radius 1, and I'm going to give you the measurements for both. Now, if you do want the measurements for radius 2 dropping to radius 1, you would need to download this plan on our website, and there is a plan for track kit 6 radius 2 dropping to radius 1. So this first part of putting two tracks in the corner of the room can be seen on page 16 of your supplement sheet. It's an own little sheet, and on page 16 it shows you for either, quite clearly, you can either measure for a radius 2 and a radius 1, or a radius 2 and a radius 3. And if you're unsure about radiuses in any way, please see our video, which is entitled Track Specification, and it tells you all about radiuses and how to check your track has got the correct radius. So with radius 2 and radius 1, we measure out along the cotton line 472 millimetres. So we've measured out 472, and I've put a line down on the cotton at 472 mil, and we do that both sides. And then on this line right in the middle of the bracket, is where we put RTR 14. So we've put an RTR 14 here on this cotton line, ready to receive the track of the two curves. If we were using radius 3 and radius 2 curves, then the measurement out along the cotton would have been 539 millimetres. With the two ARC 45s fitted, and now fit it to the RTR 14 that's on the wall, we now, with another RTR 14 on the other end, we then place that on the wall directly in line with the track in the cotton line, and the line on the wall 472, because this is radius 2, should be in the middle of the track, in the middle of the bracket. But before really pushing it properly, just check that both brackets are coming out nice and vertically, coming away from the wall nice and straight at 90 degrees, and the arc does seem to be positioned correctly in the room and nice and level. And then you can then push the bracket firmly onto the wall. Always ensuring that the posi pan bolt comes up through the last pair of sleepers of each curve end. Now fit the two inner ARC 45 curves. Again, making sure the posi pan screw comes up through the end pair of sleepers. RTR 22 is a bracket which supports ARC 45 on the both curves, and it supports it onto the wall below the tracks. And it can either support it on either of the walls. It can either support it down onto this wall, or if you turn it over and bend it the other way, it will support it down onto your other wall. So the choice is yours. Whichever way you decide to bend it, you then put your double-sided tape on the flat that's going to go onto the wall, but don't at this stage remove the cover. You leave this on, and what you've got to do now is you've got to form the bend, so it's basically running parallel with the track, and it's picking up both junctions, each side of the junction, and then it's coming down to the wall, and then it's flat on the wall to stick your curve. So when you're happy with that position, you'll then mark it with a pencil. So we just start bending it, and we put a little bend on the tab for the wall, and we put a bend, so it's the two notches and they're the two bend points. So then you just offer it up, and it's actually quite similar to your sample pack where you were doing it for the one track. So just takes a little bit of time, and very small bends make a lot of difference to the direction. But you have to look horizontally at the track and check that the track's nice and straight between the two brackets RTR 21s, and you basically just keep bending it, sorry, RTR 14s. So we get this so it's really whole track, both tracks are nice and tight, and it does take a little playing around. It's a a little bit of a thing, and both this bracket will do either track, radius 2 and radius 1, or radius 3 and radius 2. It will move the position, the support position, and that's all. But once you're completely happy that you've got it right, don't worry, it will move. You have to hold it in place, and really you need to go out and have a look. But when you're absolutely happy that the bracket's in position and it's nicely done, you then get your pen and you mark on the wall where this position is. So this is nice and flat on the wall, and the track's been held in the correct position. And then you just take it away. You then take the sticker off the bracket, the cover, and then you just place it back on the wall exactly where it was. Now don't worry, nothing will be supported until you actually put the bolts in. So just check that it seems nicely positioned.
And it does take a bit of time, and you're happy with the position. And then hold it nice and tight on the wall for at least 10 seconds, obviously to get it to bond with the wall. Then fit RTR22 to the track using 4 Posi-Pan nut bolts, always ensuring that the bolts come up each side of the track connector. Now fit the 2 ARC 22.5 brackets, which are the RTR23 brackets. Again, these will fit either radius 2, radius 1 or radius 2, radius 3. It just changes the position on the wall when they're fitted. And again, exactly the same way as you fitted this one, you put your double-sided tape on, but do not remove the cover, and then you just start forming the bracket on the 2 bend lots. So you bend one back. It's not quite 45 degrees, but it's pretty close to it, and then you just offer it up, and you've got to take a view across the top and really look at the top, and you're making sure that the bolts line up with the ARC 22.5 position on the track, and that this bracket is nice and flat with the wall. Bit more of a twist, and little bends make all the difference. And when you're happy with the position of it, you get your pen, it's nicely in line. You know, look above, look at your 2 holes above, and make sure it's nice and line. And when you're happy with the position on the wall, you then mark around the position on the wall, and you take off your double-sided tape, or you cover to your double-sided tape, and then you just place it onto the wall at your marks. At your pen mark or your pencil mark. When you're happy with all the bolts coming up each side of the sleeper at the ARC 22.5 position as well, and at the connections at the ARC 45 positions, you can then tighten up with a screwdriver, holding the nuts with your fingers. Don't over tighten, as this will damage the sleepers. At the ARC 22.5, if there isn't a connection there's usually a pattern in the sleeper curve, so you can see it even with larger curves. And everything all nice and tight, always leaving the end 2 loose, ready to receive the next set of tracks. And again, nice and parallel, running with the cotton line in the corner of the room. Now fit, using RTR01, a length of track along the cotton line. And this length of track will depend on whether you're using radius 2 to radius 1 on the ceiling, or you're going to come out with radius 3 and drop to radius 2, which indeed your instructions show it 3 going down to 2. If you want to do 2 going to 1, as I say, there is a plan on the website which you need to download. But I'm going to give you the measurements for both. If this is, which indeed it is, radius 2 dropping to radius 1, the length of this track is 809 millimeters, which is the length of a long track, or 4 track lengths, so 2 double tracks, and a specially made piece of track which is 139 millimeters long. And you need to cut this and make it up yourself, or if you go to a decent modelling shop, they will cut it for you. If you're going for radius 3 dropping to radius 2 as shown on your main instructions, then this track length is 943 millimeters long, which is 5 track lengths and a track cut at 105 mil long. And again, you need to make this up yourself or get it made in a shop. If you do get it made in a shop, bear in mind you do need 2 special track lengths, because you'll need one on the other wall when you do the other curve. We now go back along the track, fitting the other RTR01s, supporting the track level with the cotton, making sure that the distance between any RTR01 never exceeds 1 track length, which is 168 millimeters. This is very important, because else if you make it too big, the track can start moving as the train goes over it, and it can pull it off the wall. When fitting RTR01s to the track, ensure the track is in line with the cotton, and then just slide the RTR01 in position so the holes line up with the ends of the sleepers and give it a good push for 10 seconds, making sure the double-sided tape bonds with the track. And then with your screws, you do one track at a time, putting your screw up through the slot, making sure it goes into the pair of tracks each side of the connector. Don't tighten one up until you've got the other screw in position. And there's a bit of play each way on the bracket to enable you, and there's also the bracket's got a little bit of a slot enabling you to bring the other screw up through the other pair of sleepers on the other side of the connector. And when both screws are in position and you're happy that they've come up right, you then check that the end of the sleepers are right on the end of the RTR01 bracket, and then you can just do them up nice and snug with a posi pan through like that. We now slide our first ART45 track onto the end of the straight. Always running your fingers over the top of the rails on every junction just to connect the connections. The spade connectors have gone in correctly. Now we're going to run, as in your instructions, we're going to run 6 of these, which in this case are radius 2, and then we're going to go drop a radius and come back to the other end of the inner track. Now the measurements given, the length of this track, and the measurements we're now going to talk about from the wall are absolutely crucial to follow, because as you go around and come back, the track must meet with the other track. You haven't got the luxury of moving anything as you go, because you're always fixing each track bit to either the wall or the ceiling. So please make sure you've got the right radius curves. You need 6 of the same now. You're either doing 6 radius 2 or 6 radius 3. Make sure you've got a pile of them and you're not going to accidentally pick up the wrong radius, because you might not spot it and it will mess up the whole track and it won't come back and connect at the end. With both posi pans coming up each side of the track connector and the sleepers in line with the end of RTR01 bracket, we now measure out from the wall, and we take an imaginary line at the ends of the rail. Ignore the spade connector, we're just looking at the ends of the rail themselves. And we measure out from the wall, directly coming out from the wall, and we measure to, as I say, the centre of a imaginary line between the 2 track rails. And that should be 162 millimetres. So we just move the track slightly if it's not. Yeah, that's spot on. So that's 162 millimetres, and that's for radius 2. If this was radius 3, the curve would be that much longer and bigger. It's 182 millimetres. Now this next bit can be seen on page 8 of your main instructions. But what we're doing is we are fitting RTR06, which is the ceiling bracket for the ceiling support arch, directly above this positioned point of the track. So we use a plumb line with a little M4 nut tied to it, and we stick the bracket up onto the wall, up onto the ceiling, sorry, with the nut exactly in the middle of the track. So it's coming down in line with the middle of the track. And then when we're happy with that position, we then push the bracket up onto the wall, again up onto the ceiling, again for another 10 seconds, allowing the tape to bond with the ceiling. Now the ceilings aren't quite as strong as walls, so be a little bit careful. You can't push quite as hard, and just keep a nice steady pressure, and that's it. So the cotton's coming through the bracket and it's coming right down to the end of the track. With ceiling support arches, RTR06, the ceiling bracket, is always in line with the track. We've positioned the track end correctly horizontally, and we've put the ceiling support arch ceiling bracket above this, directly above this, in the correct position. We now need to support this track in the correct position vertically, and to do that we need to build the ceiling support arch at the right length so it supports the track at the right position. With a flat ceiling this is very easy. It's position X, it's whatever you've measured down from the ceiling in the first place. In this example it's 280 millimeters. If this ceiling had a slight slope to it, you'd need to put a spirit level on this track, holding the track horizontally, and then you take a measurement from here to the ceiling, and that would be the distance you'd require. You probably would need 2 people to do this. Now I'm going to demonstrate to you how to build the bottom part of the ceiling support arch so it will support your track 280 millimeters from the ceiling. This is shown on page 8 of your main instructions. What we do is we take RTR04 and we subtract 109 millimeters off 280, which gives 171 millimeters. And what we do is we measure from the end with the eye, and we measure down 171 millimeters, and that is where we mark RTR 04. 171. So we put a pencil mark there, and then with tin snips we cut a further 7 millimeters or so below that line. Again, front eye at the top, pencil, and then cut underneath it. So we've got the eye at the top, we've marked down 171 millimeters, and we've cut just below that line. You now pass RTR04 through the plates of RTR05, and using M4x8mm bolts, which are 2mm bigger than the ones you're using at the track, you bolt them each side of RTR04 with your pencil mark just coming into view at the bottom of the plate. And then you tighten these bolts up, making sure that RTR comes nice vertically up from the bracket. The reason we've cut RTR04 slightly longer is to allow for any adjustment. You might not have bent these exactly to the nearest millimetre, and the ceiling might not be completely flat. So when the track's in place, it allows for a little bit of adjustment at a later date. So with the first ceiling arch fitted at the right length, holding the track at the right height, we now tighten all the posi pans up. We tighten the ones at the track ends. We tighten up the tension, the adjusting screws, make sure they're nice and tight, and as important, make sure the one going to the ceiling's nice and tight. You need to be in a position where you can look down on the track and check that the nuts have come up through each side of the track junction at the pair of sleepers right at the ends of the curves. And that also when you do up the bolts, the nuts must be in the middle of the 2 rails. When you've connected this ART45 and you've done these nuts up and these bolts and this one at the top, if the support bracket down has got any slight bend in it, or you haven't bent this straight, or indeed you haven't exactly put it above the track end, the action of doing all this will have moved this. So before we go take the next measurement from here to the wall, it's very important to reposition the first one. So the track now, the point needs to be an imaginary line between the 2 bolts, because they're going up through the track in the middle of the track. So imaginary line between the 2 tracks, and that needs to be 162 millimeters for radius 2, or 182 millimeters for radius 3. So you've got to look down on that, and you have to basically check that you've got 162, and if not you have to move, and you literally are bending the bracket So it absolutely is 162. So when that position is correct on that one, you're now in a position to measure out with this one. And this one is for radius 2 is 472, and if it was radius 3 it would be 539. So if that's not quite correct, then you've got to twist it there. So you've got to keep going back and checking both of them. You need to have both these measurements correct, and the way you change either of them is you just literally are turning the bracket around this point here. And again, using a plumb line to fit RTR06 onto the ceiling directly above the track. Pushing nicely up onto the ceiling to get a good bonding with the double-sided tape. With the second ceiling support arch fitted and the track running horizontally, we now again measure and check this position. So with the nuts, bolts done up, and each side of the track connector, and you've done up these nuts and you've done up the ceiling nuts, you take a measurement from the middle between the two bolts back to the ceiling, and this is the same. So for radius 2 it's 472, radius 3 it's 539. And only when you're happy with this, you've bent this bracket so it's holding there on its own, you then can go out to the end of the track and take the measurement there. You don't need to touch this one, that's held in place unless you've accidentally hit the track badly and maybe moved it. It should be in the right position. So now you're measuring at the end of the track, and at this position for radius 2 it's 782 millimeters, and for radius 3 it's 896 millimeters, and that's coming straight out from the wall. And only when you're happy with both those measurements are correct, you then drop down your plumb line to fit your next ceiling arch. We're now fitting our fourth Arc 45 curve, which means we're halfway round the curve. So we're the furthest out from the wall that we're going to come. And with the third ceiling support arch fitted and this position again checked, 782 for radius 2 and 896 for radius 3, and you're happy with that position, and you've measured this from the wall, which is the radius 2 would be 910 millimeters from the center of the track to the wall, and if this was radius 3 it would be 1044 millimeters. So with those two measurements correct, don't worry about these two brackets, they'll stay in position. Then you're ready to drop a plumb line again for your fourth ceiling arch. When fitting these Arc 45s, the measurements we're giving you are very easy to achieve, and it should almost fall into place. If for any reason you're struggling to get these measurements, it could well be that you've used the wrong Arc 45 radius curve. You could have picked up an incorrect radius. This is very easy to do because by sight they're quite difficult to tell apart from each other. Do check our track specification video and do make sure that you have got the correct radiuses, because trying to do the measurements with the wrong radius you could well damage the track. We're now heading back towards the wall. So with this bracket in position, all tightened, and you've measured 910 millimeters off the wall with radius 2 or 1044 with radius 3, we're now measuring the center of this track back to the wall, and that is exactly the same as this bracket here. So it should be exactly the same measurement as this bracket, which is 782 millimeters for radius 2 and 896 millimeters for radius 3. We're now at this track end 3/4 of the way round the curve. So from here we're going to drop to a radius and go back to the corner and join up with the other track end. But at this point there is two measurements you can take. You can take a measurement off the wall, which with radius 2 is 472 millimeters, which is the same as this bracket out here. Or you can, or if you were using radius 3, this would be 539 millimeters. So you can measure from there to the end of the track. And the other measurement which is worth taking at this point is the diameter of this curve. So from the centre of this bracket to the centre of the track. Now if this is radius 2, a radius 2 is 438, so 2 lots of 40 is 438, is 876 millimetres. So the distance from there is 876, and if this was radius 3 being 505 millimetres, it would be 1010 millimetres, and that would be from the centre of the track to the centre of the track. So that's very good 2 measurements to take. This is quite an important stage of putting up the return loop. We're now going to drop a radius and we're going to join it back to this track here. In this case we're using radius 1 because we've gone round in radius 2. If you'd gone round in radius 3 you'd be dropping to radius 2. But rather than doing one more arc 45 and measuring to the wall, we're not going to do that. We're going to put in both arc 45s. And the reason for that is if there's been any discrepancy here due to the fact that, you know, slightly measured wrong, and this is a few mil out this position, then the discrepancy will be taken out over 2 track lengths. So we're just going to put those 2 track arc 45s in, and then wherever the junction falls, we're going to just put a plumb line down for our last ceiling support arch. And so with the 2 arc 45s connected, in this circumstance radius 1, you then put on your RTR 06 for your last ceiling support arch, and with a cotton line just drop it down through the middle of the connection, wherever it may be. You just don't take a measurement on this last one, it's just wherever the track allows it to fall. Do need to dismantle this final ceiling arch at the adjustment screws to get the bracket over the track and then build it back up again. With all ceiling support arches in place, the next thing to do is to stand back in the room and with the track at eye level, follow the loop around and check that the track is completely level. And if any of the brackets need adjusting, this is the time to just come along with your screwdriver, undo the screws and adjust the bracket either up or down to give a nice level track. Don't worry too much about the track in between the arc 45s, as we are going to now put in arc 22.5 brackets to support this bit. The first arc 22.5 bracket to fit is the wall bracket, RTR 07 if it's radius 2, or RTR 21 if it's radius 3. And it's important to note with this bracket that the sleepers of the track do come over the edge of the bracket. The next thing to fit is a ceiling chord arch. This is found on page 10 of your main instructions. And what you need to do is to fit RTR 09 onto the ceiling, again using a plumb line with a little M4 nut tied on the end of a piece of cotton, and this runs through exactly the track at arc 22.5. With most tracks you will see a gap in the railway sleepers at this position, even if it's a full double length track. And as I say, you just nicely put the RTR 09 onto the ceiling directly above arc 22.5, and again nicely firm push up onto the ceiling to fit the bracket. With the ceiling chord arches, the bracket always lies at 90 degrees to the track direction. With RTR 08 now on the ceiling, you can now fit RTR 09, doing up the Posi-Pan bolts, holding the nuts in the middle between the 2 rails and the bracket itself in line with the sleepers. We now measure from the bottom of the track to the ceiling, which is 280 millimeters in this case with a flat ceiling, and this gives us the length that we need to cut the 3mm cord that is supplied with the kit. When it comes to cutting the 3mm cord for your ceiling arches, the length you need to cut it is 3 times the distance from the track to the ceiling plus 70mm. So 280 times 3 plus 70 is 910mm. So we measure out 910mm of cord. Now to cut this cord, don't be tempted to just cut it with a knife. It will fray and it will make it virtually impossible to put the cord through the brackets of the ceiling arch. So what you need to do before you cut it is you need to pull it as tight as you can between your fingers, and with it pulled tight across your fingers, roll the insulating, some insulating tape tightly round the string, as absolutely as tight as possible. And the idea being that it leaves, it basically pulls as tight as you can, and then with a knife and a chopping board you cut right the way down through the middle of the insulating tape, leaving a nice tight shoelace type finish. And that is much easier to pass it through the holes, because the holes are quite tight on the bracket, and by the time you've painted them there really isn't a lot of room for this cord to pass through. That ceiling, there's no reason why you can't cut all 7 bits of cord for the 7 cord arches that are required for the return. And if the ceiling's of the same level on your other return, you could cut another 7 pieces of cord for those brackets as well. With the cord cut to length, we then pass it through RTR09, putting a knot on the end, and we've removed the tape off the end of the cord, and we then just pull that tight. Again, referring to page 10 of your main instructions, we pass the cord through holes 4, 5 and 6 of RTR10, and then 7 and 8 of RTR08, and we pull the string so the RTR10 is just coming up at about 20 degrees off the horizontal. We then put the cord through holes 9, 10 and 11 of RTR10, and we make it so it's now parallel with the track, and then pass the cord back through the same way as the other cord going through with the knot, and then we tension it. But the idea of this tension is all it's doing is supporting the track when a train runs over it. It's not in any way lifting the track up, it's all fairly loose. The problem is if you pull this too tight, these cords, because it's fixed solid here, you'll put too much stress on this tape and it will pull it off the ceiling. It might not pull it off straight away, but over a period of time you'll find that the bracket will just come away from the ceiling. So it really is quite relaxed. There's in no way is this lifting the track up. It is just supporting, so if a train goes over it, it then has a little bit of tension. And when you're happy with that tension, you then just wrap the cord around and go working up to the ceiling, and then there's some notches on the top and you just tie one off on the notch, and then you can take the tape off the end if you wish. We now fit the remaining 6 cord arches at arc 22.5. With the return hoop completed, our final job is just to check every connector that's gone in right at every track joint. And the best way to do this is just to run an empty carriage around the track and listen for any noise that might be of a step going over one of the track connections. So we just run an empty carriage and we just listen. And that seems fine. When these pair of tracks come round the corner and meet with RTR14, you can, if you want, extend these pair of tracks at every track length by using more RTR14s. So you could carry these pair of tracks down the wall before you do the return hoop if you wish. Or you can put the inner track using RTR01s and suspend the outer track off the ceiling. This is shown on the instructions for Track Kit 5 if you're interested in this. However, there is a case with room top railways that less is more. Because the track is so visual in the room, if you make it too big, it can be a mistake. So we're not going to extend this at all. We're just going to carry on with this return curve going straight back to the return hoop. So we're going to put on our required amount of track to do this return, which, as I say, we're doing radius 2, radius 1 is 809 millimeters of track. If this was radius 3, 2, it would be 943, as in your instructions. And then fitting the RTR ones at 1 track length intervals. We now fit the ARC45 curves using the ceiling support arches, using the measurements given from the wall to position both the ceiling arch and the track end. At this point, with your last ARC45 before you drop down a radius, you're measuring from the wall and you're also measuring the diameter of your circle. And now dropping down a radius and fitting the last 2 ARC45s. With these 2 tracks in place, you drop a plumb line without measuring and fit your last ARC45 ceiling arch. And again, we stand back in the room and with the track at eye level, we check that it's nice and flat as it goes the whole way round the return loop. And if any of the brackets need adjusting, you simply undo the adjusters and slide the bracket up and down on its support. With the track now level, we now fit the ARC 22.5 brackets, starting with the wall bracket RTR07 if it's radius 2 or RTR21 if it's radius 3. On both RTR07 and RTR21, the end of the sleepers do protrude over the end of the bracket. And now we fit the 7 ceiling chord arches. When fitting ceiling support arches and ceiling chord arches, it's nice if you've got a nice stable platform where you're just above track level. When it's coming to putting a cotton line and putting something on the ceiling, it's just a very nice position to be in. But be very careful when you bring your head up that you don't clout any of the head on any of the brackets, because you will bend them. And again, with the second loop finished, you run an empty carriage round, listening at every track joint to check that there's no steps. And you will hear it as the carriage runs over it. And that's your track finished. Any power connector comes away from the wall, and we recommend with Track Kit 6 running the wire down the corner of the room, and with a little bit of filler and paint you can hide this. And always, if there's young children in the house, put the transformer out of their reach so you can set a safe speed for the train.